there can be coercion, there can be intimidation, and I think the most dangerous of all is there can be gatekeeping, where we know very precisely which people we need to impede in their efforts to vote, or which people we need to vote for by altering the way that the machines are. And it can create a very difficult to detect form of altering the election results in a very demographically plausible way. So that's the first part. But the second part that I think is particularly dangerous is it's setting the stage for removal of accountability altogether. So I'm going to go into that tonight. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use real-world examples from going around in the field and getting actual data and observing actual things happening. Because one of the things that I find most perplexing is this sort of disconnect we have in polite political society where we pretend that there's no such thing as tampering with an election. It's impolite to talk about. It doesn't happen. We're all so genteel. Let's talk about how we can prevent it, but let's pretend it never actually happens. Well, it does. And so I'm going to talk about some real world examples that I've visited and seen in action. And I'm going to put it in a very simple framework. When I talk about removing accountability from elections, and I'm going to come back around to show you how the stripping away of ballot privacy is setting the stage for complete removal of accountability. But accountability in elections simply means that the public can authenticate that the announced results are true. If you can't authenticate that what you've been told is true, you haven't actually got control of the choosing process at all. So what's actually at stake is not your freedom of information right. What's actually at stake is your freedom itself. Let me give you an example from history in a different place altogether, where we talk about the realization that control of accountability is control itself. In the 1700s, there was a family with a patriarch who was a brilliant man. He lived in, they called it the Jewish ghetto in Germany at the time. It was the legal term. They weren't allowed to live anywhere else but this one street. And Meyer Rothschild had been subjected to pretty brutal discrimination, as had everybody in his ethnic group. He became a trader of rare coins, and some princes liked his rare coins, so he came to know some of the princes and the royalty throughout Europe. And he got good enough with his accounting that he learned how to sort of leverage money and loan them money when they needed it. At first it was personal, but then, he'd get more money and he got better at financing the royals. He had 5 sons. And he placed one adult son in each country, one in England, one in Austria, one in Germany, one in France, and they began to finance the royals. After the royals got used to depending on them for financing, then they began to finance their wars. Now, he had quite an incentive, because during the French Revolution and during the time of Napoleon, whether the Jews would be free of the restrictions or not was dependent on the outcome of a particular war. So his accounting was a little bit interesting, and the right person won that war, and it's been alleged that Napoleon lost the war because the Rothschild family tricked him into thinking he had the money to continue with the war when he did not. Their accountability was ultimately the control. The royals were thinking, we know what we're doing, we're running our wars, but they didn't actually have the accounting. Now, they realized this after a couple hundred years. It wasn't by then just the Rothschilds, it was also the barons who also had 5 sons and put them in different countries. And at that point, they started setting up federal reserves, one in Germany, one in France, one in the US, because they realized wait a minute, if we have private powers who have total control of the accounting and our financing, they have control of us. We have no sovereignty. This is very similar to elections, but on a different level of sovereignty. The public is supposed to be sovereign over our government. But if the government controls all the accounting of its own choosing, actually, we're not sovereign. The government is controlling its own choosing, and it's got complete control of who it is installed. Whether it chooses to exercise that or not is at the discretion of whoever's in charge at the moment. But if we can't see the accounting in an election, see and authenticate for ourselves that the results that they announce are true, we're not really choosing. We're just hoping we're choosing. Well, now, what does it mean if we're not choosing? When this country was formed, taxation without representation, the problem with that is if you're not choosing your representatives and they are coercing taxes from you, it's simply theft because you have not consented to them taking your property. So the entire structure of our government is based on the idea that the public is sovereign over the government and must be able to control the government and must be able to control who's chosen in the government. Now, we're told that that's what we do, but if they remove the accountability so that we can never see if we actually chose it, and they just say, we're good guys, trust us, the results that we're telling you are true. And how dare you question us? Are you questioning me? We aren't choosing. We're just trusting and hoping and wishing that it's what we would like it to be. So, there's 4 areas, to make it very simple, that need to be something the public, not experts, not vendors, not election officials, but the public must be able to see and authenticate. And those 4 things are simply who can vote, who did vote, the counting of the vote, and the chain of custody of the vote. So what I'm going to tell you is examples of how any one of those things in the real world can and has altered the results of elections. And I'll give you a preview. The end game with stripping away ballot privacy is this. You can control the entire ball of wax, removing all accountability, all public accountability from start to finish if you can go to internet voting. The public can never verify who was allowed to vote. They can never verify who did vote into that system. They can never verify the count, and they never can verify the chain of custody of the software that was in there. In order to push internet voting through, you need a couple things. You need to remove the public's ability to say, we have the right to examine the ballots. Because how are you going to, get rid of that? And you need to have a way to tie the vote to the voter so that you can authenticate, if you were using it honestly, that the vote is real.
But how does that square with privacy of the ballot? So you can go back and identify the voter.
They just lie. They say, well, you can't.
In your mind.
It doesn't. And when I have talked to government officials and gotten far enough, they admit it doesn't square. And they say various things, but for example, in Colorado, they said, well, it's just the government looking at how you voted. There's no special class of people that have the right to see how we voted. And by the way, we have no idea what happens to that data if it's sold, slipped on a disk to somebody. We do know that there were 5 major corporations in 2012 who told their employees that if they voted for Obama, they'd lose their job. The Koch brothers have 40,000 employees, and they put it in a memo. Said if you vote for Obama, you lose your job. Oh, we just meant that in a theoretical way. Well, if you start taking away ballot privacy, this becomes real extortion. I want to go back now to how the loss of ballot privacy specifically interacts with the 4 areas of accountability. Starting with the who can vote, which is the voter list. One of the very interesting cases that I was asked to consult on was a case in Memphis, Tennessee. It's actually Shelby County, Tennessee, but I don't want to confuse it because the whole Voting Act was a different Shelby County. There's lots of Shelby counties. So I'll just say Memphis to keep it clear. What happened in Memphis was, now there they had a combination of absentee voting as we have here, and also early voting where they go into a place and vote, and then they can also vote on election day. Well, they decided that all of the absentee votes and early votes, let's update the voter list right before election day and make sure that all the people who've already voted can't vote again on election day. So they decided, let's take the list of who can vote, update it with all the people who voted, insert it into the system so that everybody who votes as of election day would supposedly be rejected if they've already voted. Except somebody from a voting machine company called ES&S, used to be Diebold, but it's the same guys and it got inherited by Election Systems and Software. Somebody from Election Systems and Software, I was able to find through the logs, remotely entered the voter list program and put in their updated voter list because they supposedly needed consulting to do this. And after the fact, he said, oops, human error, I put the wrong database in, sorry. And it was an August election, and what he did was he put in the complete voter history information for a May election, meaning that everybody who voted in May, whether or not they had voted in August, was told they could not vote. But the bigger issue, and that was 5,000 people, the bigger issue, which was not reported in the press, that there were 30,000 people who didn't vote in, or who, see how this works. They didn't vote in May, but they did vote early in August. And all of those people were able to vote or be voted for again. Well, I found a whole number of people who had been voted 2 or 3 times. Now, it wasn't the person themselves who had done this. It was somebody on the inside who was just in there sticking ballots in because they could, because the list of who can vote was a false list. It doesn't really matter if it's human error or if it's deliberate, because the result's exactly the same. The election should have been set aside, incurable uncertainty. It wasn't set aside because the judge said, there's no evidence that they did it on purpose. Now, I ask you, if you are a teenager working at the mall and the till is short by $50 and they find it in your purse and you say, it was human error, it wasn't on purpose, what happens to you? I mean, you're out the door and you might get prosecuted. In elections, we have this odd custom where any election official can say anything they want as long as they claim it's human error. It makes no difference whatsoever. And whenever you start hearing people come, well, I don't know if they did that on purpose. You know, she was probably well-intended. It doesn't matter. The result was wrong. It violated people's voting rights because it did not count the vote as it was cast. In this case, it didn't count people's vote because it had the wrong voter list. Another example, who can vote? Manipulation of the count. Stanislaus County, California. For some reason, all the Latino voters who customarily voted in a Catholic church had their polling place moved to someplace completely different and it wasn't noticed. But all of the non-Latino voters did not have their polling places moved, which caused the Latino voters to have to vote a provisional ballot because they couldn't find their polling place. And then, if they could vote at all, the truth is, it simply suppressed the vote because they could not vote. So there's different ways to do it. It doesn't really matter how, but the list of who can vote and the procedures used for who can vote, you can do it either way. You can dump in extra votes from some insider, or you can suppress votes, but you can completely change the election result with the list of who can vote. Several states are trying to make it not public information, the list of who can vote. Utah has legislation pending right now that says, some brilliant representative has said, we shouldn't let anyone know what the voter list is. No one should be able to confirm who's on that. It's a violation of privacy to know who the voters are. Well, no, it's a key accounting process. If you can't know who can vote, you can't ever reconcile election results or have accountability. The second area is who did vote. Now, the who did vote, there's so many instances where that information has changed. I actually had about 3 different examples here, but I think I'm just going to keep it short and pick my personal favorite one. I think I'll pick Oregon. Oregon is such a liar. They've been telling people for years that they have high turnout because of their all-absentee system. They've been saying that since before Washington went all-absentee. So I looked up their statistics. They've been saying we have sometimes 80% of our people turn out to vote. No, it's 47%. And they aren't even halfway up the list in the United States. When compared with non-absentee places, they don't even get up that high with that. I think they were 28th out of 50 states in turnout. So when I brought that up, I believe it was Sam Reed responded on an email list, and he said, oh, no, you don't understand. It's the off-year elections that are 80% really high. Okay, who did vote in those off-year elections if they had a 47% turnout for the presidential election and it became 80%? Do we even know that the real people put the ballots in? Because if you have an absentee system, you can simply go through the voter history, find all the people who never vote but who are registered, and just dump absentee ballots into the absentee drop-off box. What about the signature comparison? When I analyzed the signature comparison in Oregon, it was a joke, frankly. It usually is. And it really has no relevance to the idea that you can dump extra ballots into the system. The problem with all absentee mailing systems, or mail-in voting, is that you have no idea who put the ballot in the pile. And forget about the signature. I don't think I'll spend all the time, unless you want to ask about it later, to explain why it's such a bogus thing, but there's many, many ways to bypass the signature check that are trivial. For one thing, you actually have all the signatures in a database, and they're in a graphic form, so you can actually have a high-speed printer. You get letters, form letters, right, with a signature on them. And nobody sat there and signed those. You can high-speed print those ballot envelopes with signatures that are correct because they're right off of the database. And they're going to match. Guess what? You can also put the ballots in, as happened in King County from what I heard in one of the elections. You can put them in after the signature check has already taken place. You can just slide them in afterwards. But at any rate, the problem there is who did vote. You don't know. You don't know if it's the real people. You don't know if those black garbage bags full of ballots that were found in King County a few years back behind a copy machine and never got counted. You don't know if they are systematically ditching ballots, if it was an act of human error. But you don't know if who did vote. You ultimately don't know that. Now let's talk about, go ahead.
I didn't understand the Oregon thing. The state said it was 80% or whatever the number was, and you say it's 47%.
It was 47%.
Well, how did you determine it was 40%? Why the difference?
Sure. Because one of the requirements in the Help America Vote Act is that every state by law must submit the data, and it's submitted to the EAC and it's available in downloadable tables. And so I simply took the data submitted by the Oregon Secretary of State, and it was 47% turnout. They've never had the turnout that they claim to have.
But is that harmless or not? I mean, what happened? The difference? Is the difference just because they decided to fluff up the numbers and make their state?
Or
was there actually fraud to get to that?
What he actually said was, okay, you're right. We didn't have high turnout in presidential. So what he claimed was that they had high turnout in non-presidential elections, which they're not required to submit data on, which makes no sense that you would have 40% turnout in a presidential and 80% turnout for the, county dog catcher.
The question, I think, is why would they do that? What's the advantage of claiming that high? What do they get?
Well, I don't know. I can't get inside their mind. I know that Oregon has been pushing, complete vote by mail for a really long time, and the selling point all across the country, because now 25 states have no fault vote by mail, I think 26, and of course Washington and Hawaii have also joined the ranks of what we call forced vote by mail. But there has been a big push to get people away from the polls and have them vote by mail, and the selling point has been that it increases turnout, but the statistics don't support that. It doesn't increase turnout from the real documentation. Yeah.
So I see quite clearly the problems with vote by mail. What I don't understand is the idea that we need accountability, and accountability includes knowing who voted. And knowing I guess knowing that a person voted, that's what you mean by who voted.
Right. Well, as far as who voted, with the case of absentee, you don't know whether it's a identity theft in a sense. In other words, I have voter databases, I don't know if any of you do, but you can simply look at them and determine all the people who are irregular voters and who haven't voted. And just simply take their names, they're registered, and stick ballots into the pool. So you don't know if someone who works with absentee ballots in an elections division voted for people by just having the printing company run off 10,000 extra ballots using the names on the list and the signatures that are already in the database, or whether it was real people one by one. You don't have any way to know that the ballots that enter the system are the real ballots. Okay. So we can talk any questions you want. I'll hit the other two areas quickly. The accountability in the vote counting. We all understand that computers can be altered, but two of the most definite situations that I came across. One was in Florida in Volusia County, and some of this is captured in the Hacking Democracy documentary. We went down there, and I asked her with public records for a copy of the results tapes that came out of each voting machine. And she said, well, those are in the warehouse. So we kind of trundled over to the warehouse early in the morning and saw one of her election workers sitting there frantically signing poll tapes. And when we received the poll tapes, they were printed a couple weeks after the election. And they had been putting the real poll tapes in the trash. And we grabbed the trash bag, which is actually on video in the documentary, and pulled the signed tapes out, and they didn't match. Guess what? So they were sitting in there just running off fake votes with fake memory cards and hurriedly signing the tapes because we had asked to see the tapes. Most people never asked to see the voting machine tapes. The other situation was really grave. It was in a county in Kentucky called Bullitt County. A deputy had been the first on the scene in a situation where a car was found belonging to a teenage girl. The door was open, her purse was empty on the floor, her cell phone was on the seat, and one shoe. He called in what he suspected was a kidnapping and was shocked at what happened next, because not only did it take forever for anyone to arrive, but then they pretty much, they yellow crime scene off the wrong car. They let people run around and fingerprint up and destroy the evidence in the real car. The photographs that he had taken were lost. Then he came to find that the last person seen with the girl was the grandson of the current sheriff. And there clearly was a cover-up. They arrested them, a young mentally retarded man, and tried to force him to admit that he had done the crime, which he never did. His family lost everything, though, in trying to defend him. So the first deputy on the scene ran for sheriff. He said, this is really bad. I've witnessed a cover-up. And his wife called me and said, you know, I went and got, just like on your movie, Hacking Democracy, I went and got those tapes right out of the voting machine, but I found them strewn all over the parking lot. We couldn't watch him count the vote because the sheriff and his granddaughter locked himself in a room and came out and announced a result. But I got the result they gave, and I got the tapes out of the trash, and not one of them matched the result. So we had a tampered election where they tampered with the count, doing whatever they did in the bathroom. That story has at least a good ending. 4 years later, the good guy ran for sheriff, actually won, and just 2 months ago announced the arrest of the real murderer. But it was I think, a sobering example of how important elections really are. It's not just about the president or about a political party, it's about public safety. So, is it a conspiracy theory that someone might rig a voting machine? No. It happens. I mean, I could give you example after example, and I'm not going to do that, but the bottom line is we have a right to see the counting of the votes, to have some way of validating that what they're claiming is the result is the result. The last one being chain of custody. In the 2008 presidential election, New Hampshire always has the first primary after the Iowa caucus. Obama was ahead, and I don't get too into statistics actually, but he was ahead by 18%. And I knew something a little odd was going on because the night before Hillary suddenly announced, I cried and all the women are going to vote for me now. And then during election day, there were reports that people were running out of ballots, and so they were delivering new ballots to all these places during the middle of the count. Brad Friedman from a great blog called Brad Blog called them up, and they denied that they actually were getting ballots. Someone was delivering ballots, and they were saying that no one was, and that was bad. So I went to New Hampshire. Dennis Kucinich had heard about the issues. He requested a hand recount of all the ballots in New Hampshire and paid for it. And I said, you know, the way they're doing it is they're going to take all the ballots from 236 locations in the state and bring them into one place and count them there. So I'm going to watch chain of custody, who has control, so we know that what they counted is actually the ballots. The first ballots that came in were from Manchester, which was one of the big cities in New Hampshire. There are 13 wards in Manchester. A ward is like a precinct, miles away from each other. Each one came in a sealed box with polls, people's signatures. But Ward 6 ballots were in Ward 5 box and vice versa. So somebody had gotten there the night before and done something to the ballots and stuck them back in the wrong box and resealed them. So that was a concern. So we waited for Nashua to come in, another big city. It came in with the ballot boxes open. There are ballots falling out of them. So we thought, well, okay, by New Hampshire state law, they're supposed to be delivered by the state police, but instead, the Secretary of State selected 2 file clerks by the name of Butch and Hoppy, who drove around in a white van picking up ballots. So we decided the next day we'll follow these vans, and we'll look at the ballots before they're picked up and after. Well, that day they couldn't really evade us successfully, and we did take photos before. And when they arrived that day, they decided to take the ballots to a different place than they normally did, which was an unlocked room. And we actually saw and have video of Hoppy, who is not a rocket scientist, saying, okay, so you guys will go out here and then we'll come in here. You know, it was ridiculous. A citizen from Connecticut showed up at night, videotaped through the little window, and was able to see them taking tins of solvent, acetone, and applying it to the absentee ballots to lift the ink off. And there's all these open boxes around. They were completely tampering with whatever ballots were counted. Bottom line is, I don't know what the real count should have been, but I think we can say that we can't express any confidence that whatever it is they recounted has anything to do with the real voter intent. Anytime, and this goes for software and ballots, anytime you lose track and can't track what what goes from where to where, whether it's the program that went into the computer or the ballots, then you don't know that what they counted is real. So even if you did a hand count of all the ballots in public, if you don't know that they're the real ballots, you still aren't anywhere. So those are the four areas: who can vote, who did vote, chain of custody, and the count. Now, with ballot privacy, I ask you to consider if somebody has a database of every voter in Washington state, and they can simply sort through and know how people voted. They can be a gatekeeper on any one of those four areas, impeding who can vote, impeding who did vote, or adding extras, altering the count in very scientific and simple ways, and also, taking chain of custody and targeting towards certain areas. So it allows a very targeted approach. It also starts allowing us to get used to the idea that an identifier will be affixed to our ballot, so that internet voting, as it gets introduced, it seems to be this relentless push, that you accept it. Now, you said I'd say what to do about things. I think we're dealing with a kind of an asymmetrical power situation where we have in some ways a lot less power than the relentless lobbying push that keeps coming to keep these things going. One of the challenges we have, and I think is to take action which makes sense to us in unpredictable ways, thinking outside the box exactly like Tim White and Alan Rosado have done. Their lawsuit may very well force Washington State ultimately to remove this identifier which allows ballot privacy theft to occur. That would be major. A lawsuit in Colorado restored the public right to see the ballots because they were trying to take that away. But the other thing we need to look at is how to create change that is durable, because one of the things I've noticed is with major multinational corporate entities and lobbyists, they have people on staff. You win one, their lawyers are just paid, they'll just try it again next year, and next year, and next year, until they win. So we have to understand that if we're dealing with asymmetrical power, we have to also give consideration to how to make resistance durable so that they don't just wait for us to get too old or lose interest. Because that's really a lot of times what the game plan is. In fact, in California, that's what one of the vendors was overheard saying. The activists, this batch will get tired of it. Just wait 5 years, 10 years, we'll get it done. So we have to continue resistance for this stuff and demand for our right to see and authenticate for as long as it takes. And that's all any questions we have?
And this may or may not be relevant, but what becomes of exit poll in a state like Washington? And are exit polls still a reliable source of...
It's an interesting question, exit polls, because, I was interested to see that for the first time this last presidential election that exit polls were canceled in 18 states. And they just said, oh, well, we don't need to do them anymore. And they were having a problematic habit of not matching the voting machines, and every time they would come up with an explanation as why the exit poll was wrong, whereas maybe the exit poll was right and the voting machine was wrong. And it's sort of taboo to bring that up. Exit polls are a good source of a red flag, but I don't spend a lot of time with them because I find that the only thing that does any good in a court of law or gets something in the paper is tangible evidence. And so I'm a little more interested in getting the logs, examining the ballots, videotaping chain of custody, so you can prove something, because you can't prove anything with an exit poll. Yes?
Yeah, on the subject of who did vote, what's your proposal?
The proposal is to vote at the polling place. I know that's a tall order for those of us who've already dropped it, but at the polling place you can see who voted. Sometimes simple is good. It's not expensive. Vote by mail is actually awful expensive. 25 states still do virtually all, like 99.9% of their voting at the polling place. They get their results in faster than absentee places, and you do know who voted there.
So you're opposed to the mail-in, the way it's done in Washington State, where everybody gets a mail-in ballot?
Yes, because you don't know who voted. At the end, you have no account. Convenience voting is just a way of saying voting that's not accountable.
But the mail-in ballots prevent things like voter harassment at polling places, things like the polling place getting moved around without notice and that kind of thing. It seems to me it's got some real advantage.
I think it's outweighed by the fact that it destroys election accountability. You have literally no idea where those ballots came from. So if you can't ever authenticate that the election is in any way real, that's a bigger problem in my mind than the fact that they might have moved a polling place. And by the way, there are other ways to deal with moving the polling places. The whole Voting Rights Act kind of controversy was kind of about that, where they had identified areas that had problems and said, you can't move your polling place until you have pre-authorization that it doesn't selectively involve one group. But to simply throw out the accountability on who voted is a massive problem in terms of election accountability, unfortunately.
I don't see how voting at a polling place eliminates the risk of fraud. I mean, we had fraud well before we had mail-in.
Okay, you're redefining it. I'm saying this, we're talking about, there's many kinds of fraud, right? I talked about 4 areas of accountability. The area of who did vote is one method. And voting at the polling place does eliminate questions of who voted. I mean, you know who voted. I don't even care about the ID whole controversy. You have to come in there and sign into a poll book. There's poll watchers and poll workers and so forth. So you know who came in, what physical body showed up at the polling place. Just like when you start a bank account, you can't just start a bank account in the mail. You have to have your physical body go in there and sign documents in front of the officer. There's a reason for that. So I know it's unpopular. But I also have seen some of the things happening with absentee voting, and it is completely unaccountable. Yes.
On those 3,000 ballots where the results were tied to voters, how was that done?
There's a barcode on the ballot.
Oh, we know that, but how was that done physically,
Oh,
practically?
how is it done? By the people who checked it. She simply took an off-the-shelf barcode scanner, it scanned the number in, and it was their voter ID.
Right, but how were the votes linked to the voter ID?
Actually, in Colorado, it was a 2-step process, and I think it is some places here as well, where there's a dot matrix on the envelope, and there's another barcode on the ballot. And if you have the envelope and the ballot, which they have in the databases, the commercial databases they're together, then it creates the voter ID. So like half your voter ID number is in one and half's on the other. And everybody, the list of the voter lists we all have a voter ID number in the list. And if you're sticking your voter ID number on the ballot, then they know who you are.
Right. I'm just wondering how they got a hold of those ballots and ran the results.
Yeah, what happened was there was an election that went into litigation. And there was also in that election, by the way, intimidation of people based on how they voted, because some election workers actually came up and threatened people and said, I know how you voted. It was kind of dicey, but there was litigation and they got an order to view the ballots. But in most states, and it certainly should be in all states, because ballots are supposed to be anonymous, ballots should be public record. I think you remember in 2000, we had a presidential election that was pretty dicey in Florida, and the press went down there afterward and looked at every ballot. They found out Gore won, actually, but... Yes?
There are currently 2 lawsuits in the state by Tim and Alan Rosado asking 3 counties to furnish ballots as public records, and the counties have refused so far. It's currently in court. Tim will tell you, and he can in a minute,
Yeah.
that it looks good. And when he and Alan win this lawsuit, the fine is anywhere from $0 to $100 per ballot per day on the counties that have refused to furnish the ballots. And we're talking for $100,000 or 100,000 ballots and $2 a day and 30 days. Well, you do the math. It's a lot of money. Now, Tim and Alan did this county a favor because he asked our lawyers not to include this county because the risk pool has withdrawn its support of public records request fines. So this county would have to pay God knows how many hundreds of thousands of dollars should we challenge this election and ask for the ballots, and they refuse to do it for X number of days. So it's really in this county's interest to get those barcodes off the ballots before the next election, because there'll probably be a body of law by then that will say you have to furnish it. So be aware and be wary.
Yes, I hope you'll get up and talk about that, because what Tim and Alan have been doing with the litigation is so important. You know, because they're literally taking off the table the opportunity to put these identifiers on ballots, and they're taking it off the table the opportunity to strip away privacy, and they're putting back on the table the public right to authenticate what's actually on those ballots. And by the way, if they're dumping ballots into the pool, as they were doing in New Hampshire, you can often find evidence of that when you examine the ballots. For example, we saw a whole stack of ballots where they had like slipped with their pen and made this little sort of tail on the little oval, and then apparently they put it through a copy machine, so there was like 100 ballots in a row with this little tail exactly like that. So you can, being able to look at the ballots has real relevance. Yes, chain of custody is kind of damaged, but it is meaningful. And I'm actually, outside of answering any questions, I'm going to sit down and I hope you'll tell them a little bit about what's going on, because this is an impressive man. Tim?
In the first lawsuit that we had that we won in San Juan County Superior Court, Judge Ronald Eaton ruled that the system that overtly linked the ballot barcode to your voter ID barcode was illegal, uncertified, and banned in the state. Ronald Eaton did that. It took us 7.5 years to get it before the judge, because our county prosecutor and auditor put forth motion after motion after motion to slow it down, to delay, challenge our standing. Couldn't get it before a judge, but we finally got it before a judge. The result of that was mail-in ballot tracker was banned. Now the way it worked, you had on your external envelope, you had a barcode next to your name, and then on the ballot there was a unique barcode. Before they sent it to you, they took the scanner like they have at the grocery store. And I watched them do this right here in our county. They scan the barcode next to your name that has your voter ID, and then they scan the unique barcode on your ballot. Before they send it to you is when they connect that. Then the voting system, the HART voting system, takes an image of every ballot, which includes the barcode on it. So you've got a database of all the ballots, the images. We've got another database of whose barcode goes to whose name. And it's a push button to unfold a spreadsheet of how everyone voted on everything. And one of the problems here with this is that this system has driven our elections to be opaque. When we said, we thought just showing them, I mean, they can't do this. What they did is, I said, they said, well, we're going to do it anyway. I said, well, we'll have San Juan Public Access come, just like we were watching some of the observers to the election office here, and put it on video and put it on the, put it on San Juan Public Access TV. Myron Henley and Randy Gaylord called an emergency meeting of the canvassing board and banned observers, cameras, telephones, video from ever coming again into the election office close enough to see a voted ballot. So I asked Randy about this at a candidate forum. I said, you can't do that, that's secret counting. He said, well, it's not secret counting because the ballots themselves are public records. Well, that's impossible to me. So I made a request in 2008 for the images of these ballots. Since we can't watch them while they're counting them and processing them, we can watch it afterwards anyway and check. And it was refused, saying their secret ballot requires that no one can ever see a voted ballot, ever. So what we have going on right now, in 2 weeks we're going to get answers from the judge in Snohomish, which is handling our suit against Island County and Skagit County. Last Thursday I was down in Vancouver, where we're suing Park County, where we had asked under the Public Records Act for these digital images of all the ballots, which they've already taken. They don't have to go through and handle the paper ballots. There's no risk for anything. I'm going to get all the ballots and use, I can Photoshop them and change the vote on them. And say, oh, look who really won, it was so-and-so. And we're going to just pull out the paper ballots and go, sorry. I mean, there's no risk to anything if the ballots are anonymous to let anyone in the world see and copy the ballots. About 23 states now do that, actually. For us, the big problem is, when you think back how it was when we were voting in the precincts, for about 5 hours in 28 precincts in Washington, in our county, something like that, no one person could see all those ballots, but they were counted in public in each precinct. And there were like 8 people there who were involved, and it was done openly. And it took about 5 hours, until 1 in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning. Now, the first ballots come in 44 days before the election, and they keep coming in until 20 days after the election. They're processed all through, there's no way anyone can watch that, and it's all in one place on one machine, the sample account. And no one can see that. What we want to do, what our goal is to require that the ballots be produced as public records, which then will happen like in Colorado. They're saying now, oh, you can't match anything to anything, but as soon as it forces public records, then they say, okay, you got to take that serial number off, because then not just officials, but anybody can figure out whose ballot is. If you know that the ballot with your serial number is going to be posted on the internet at the end of the election, well, you can sell your vote, for one thing, you can buy it from someone else, or you can intimidate someone. Secret ballot is all about vulnerable voters that are vulnerable to being bribed, or vulnerable because their sister-in-law maybe is, their papers aren't right, or something. People that are mouthy like me, I'll tell anyone how I vote. That is not the same as being able to prove how I vote, but someone else being able to prove how I vote. And that's a really hard thing to get across to people, that the secret ballot is for vulnerable voters. The last thing you want someone to do when they're filling out the ballot at home is, are they really going to, they threatened me, and I know that they threatened that woman at the bank, like it happened in Colorado. Somebody coming up and saying, I know how you voted, and we're going to check the immigration status of your family. She was Hispanic. The last thing I want someone to do is, are they really going to check? And if they do, are they going to follow it up? Should I vote how they say that they want me to? You just don't want people to go there. And we've had the secret ballot for so long, we've forgotten that that's the only reason that in this country we don't have all these problems about buying and selling and voter intimidation, because it works. And once you get rid of that, it has both things. It drives accounting into secret, because you only want the government officials to know, to be able to connect things. So we're thinking 2 weeks we're going to get the results from these 2 cases, Snohomish County and Clark County. The Superior Court judge is putting a rule on whether or not the ballots are public records. The Secretary of State and the county auditors, this is through the state, they are saying that those voted ballots, because of what they call the secret ballot, they're mixing the security requirements for the ballots to make sure that those paper ballots don't have any, it's slips any in or something. They're saying that requires, they're calling it cradle to grave secrecy. From the time it arrives at the county until they shred them 24 months after the election, nobody, except vendors, government officials, and temp workers can see those ballots. That's what we're going to fix with this.
It's just so
And she's been my inspiration. She pointed me to this.
And in terms of what, sorry, in terms of what can be done, if you look at it, it's not a magic wand that will solve every problem. But if you know that there's 4 key accounting areas, then you can figure out what's meaningful. And it's meaningful to look at ballots. And it's meaningful to keep them secret. And you go with a limited goal, and you go after things one by one. And the things are going to differ from place to place because we have great differences. But I've seen tremendously inspiring successes from ordinary citizens who've made things happen that are meaningful. But we're still at grave risk, I think, because it's relentless. Yeah.
I have heard that in some places in this country, you can put all the ballots for an election online, so that the public can actually count the ballots again and verify that that election was correctly accounted for.
Humboldt County, California, which is where Eureka County is, has been doing that since 2008. And they haven't had any problems, but guess what? She has a hard system like you do, but she does not allow, she has disabled the feature that puts the marker on each ballot so that you can't tell who voted what. So these things are actually very achievable, and this was an inexpensive fix. She just bought a scanner from Office Depot and ran the ballots through it and made them available. And the first time they did that, they found out that the voting system, which at that time was Depot, they found out it was counted. It had left an entire precinct off and said it was counted. Really valuable things happen that aren't even necessarily expensive, but they can take lots and lots of years, so like lawsuits. But you have litigation, you've got the media, you've got negotiation, public awareness, and as long as you ask for what is really meaningful, rather than getting sidetracked into, things, because a lot of times when you're asking for something, then they'll say, oh, don't you want this over here? And it's something that doesn't really do anything for you. But I've been so impressed. I better stop talking because I'm going to start to talk. I've been so impressed with what's happened here in San Juan County, because it's an example of how the public can resist an abusive system.
I should point out, Democrats, that up for election this year are Randy Gaylord and Myra Henley, so be aware and warned that the same group is going to come back in unless you do something about it. I mean Miley Henley, not Myra Henley.
And by the way, even if the system is at risk, my story in Bullitt County, Kentucky, the reason that the good guy sheriff eventually won and has the bad guy now in jail is because he overran it. You still have to have a reasonably close election, or at least not a huge landslide, in order to tamper with an election plausibly.
Like 50 ballots separating the candidates.
55 ballots, but if you really believe that a candidate is really important and going to help install meaningful change, then it's very important, no matter what the election system, to get behind them, because you can literally overrun it. When this sheriff won, the outgoing sheriff slammed his hand on the wall and he said, "How could this have happened?" He overran it.
And when you say overran, you mean you got enough popular?
Yeah, the margin was so large that they couldn't shade it.
In each of those 4 categories you just described, it shift 8%.
Right. He was so popular, and that's a whole story in itself. But yeah, he just, and in a sense, if McCain had tried to tamper the election away from Obama in 2008, I think it would have been a similar thing. I mean, you know, here you had Obama filling stadiums and McCain, you can fill a room at a Holiday Inn. You know, people would have said, this doesn't seem plausible. You know, you can overrun it, but the problem is that's not sustainable. So you still need to eventually restore the transparency so that a close election can be a real election.
This happened in about 2000 when I was moving from New Mexico up to Washington State, and we had MRGDC elections in the Rio Grande Conservancy District, which is a totally it's state agency, but it's not accountable to anybody. It's a very ancient form for the irrigation system in Passaic. The gal who worked for them called me up and said they're taking people off the vote. So they were literally going into the ballot box, because we still had ballots, and they were taking people's votes out. And I voted, and I said, you can't be serious. And she was.
It's important. Those stories are so important because there's a denial that this ever happens. It's like this is only third world countries. It happens in the U.S. And we shouldn't be, yes, we should be outraged, but we should also just address the problem, you know, instead of pretending that we're such a perfect country that it would never happen here.
I believed her, because in the previous election, our county clerk had literally sat on the ballot box in the little trailer.
Which county were you in?
Sandoval.
And New Mexico has that Cibola County too, which is a really, woo!
I mean, in 1930, that somebody ate 13 votes and his candidate won by 3. And then when I first got there, there was somebody who was running for office and his name was left off the ballot box.
That, by the way, the name being left off the ballot
precinct
is something I've been tracking, and I'm actually stunned at how common this is. And I used to think it might be legitimately someone's mistake, but this is really common. So that is another thing. You have to check the sample ballots for every precinct because they are leaving names off ballots. And I mean, it's stunning how often it's happening because I track the news feeds on it from around the country, and then they always say, well, it's too late, we already mailed out the absentee ballots.
That's exactly what they said. Oh, well, you know, and we found this out by like 8 o'clock in the morning, but by noon, nobody put corrected ballots there.
Yeah, so I mean, it happens, and I think our job is to not be so polite that we polite ourselves out of democracy, and not be so strident and shocked that we, we've got to just get down to business when this happens and say, look, these are the things that we have to be able to account. We have a right to account for these things, and they'll sometimes tell you the law says that you don't have a right. You know what? You cannot pass a law against a human right. That becomes an invalid law. You could say we have a law that slavery is okay, but that is an invalid law on its face because it violates a fundamental human right. By the way, the secrecy of the ballot, privacy, it is in the International Declaration of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that there must be a secret ballot. It violates international standards to do what we're doing. And that is a helpful phrase when dealing with local election officials or state when they start saying, well, this is how it's done. You say, well, this is a violation of international election standards. The Carter Center has refused to monitor elections in the United States because they do not meet international standards now. So, so it can be helpful to look at what frames support our position because we're right. We have truth on our side.
Like I said, for verification, I'm about verification. And that's what the thing I don't understand is, why is this terrible resistance to having some independent check? I mean, why not have an independent? I don't think they have any confidence that these machines are actually counting the ballots accurately. I think they probably are, myself, actually. But they don't have any idea whether or not they are or not, and are just frightened at the thought of it being compared. I look for anomalies. In our election here, I noticed that in the election level was in, that for some reason, the people who voted at the drop boxes on both Lopez and on Marcus really voted quite differently than the people that voted by mail.
This is one of the situations, the thing that has bothered me. We've had several really close elections. We have a fairly large population of people who live here in the summer and go somewhere south for the rest of the year, and they have their ballots. If you look at the voter list, you can see where their ballots are mailed. And I'm always curious whether, to do the research to find out who votes into the two places. And when it's a popular national election, I'm fairly sure there's the inclination to do that, and whether that would validate their right to vote here.
And did the ballot even go to them? One of the things I found in Washington State and California and Georgia is that some counties, and they don't tell you this, outsource and they send their voter list to a middleman who's a private vendor, and he then programs the voter list so that it will be compatible with the printing and mailing house, and he sends it to the printing and mailing house. And there's a serious chain of custody issue with databases.
Well, the situation here, many of the people who live here in the summer and somewhere else in the winter are more conservative in their voting and party support. So we've had heavier turnout toward the more conservative candidates than we would expect, from a county that had 70% vote for Obama.
It's good to be vigilant. Isn't that what our ancestors told us to do? Never-ending vigilance? And it really has to be never-ending. I mean, it's actually, I think, really uplifting to see somebody notice something and then go ask questions.
All right, well, Tom, are you standing to say we have to go out?
Well, I'm just wondering, what does that say?
Yes.
Yeah, I think maybe you're getting ready to shut down too, are you not?
We are here for you also. 8 o'clock was the original time.
Well, may I make a suggestion, not to him, but the rest of you, just remember there's a tip jar over there.
Yes.
Put in a lot of energy for us.
Tim, do you want to say anything about the apparent disenfranchisement of Hispanics in this county? You've done some work on that.
Well, that's kind of another issue. Yeah, under the Voting Rights Act, if there's a formula federally for when you have to have bilingual ballots, it's the percent of the people that have typically Spanish, but it can be Chinese or Vietnamese as a first language, and their level of education and how bilingual. There's a formula anyway. There are just 4 counties in Washington that are covered by that, 3 in Eastern Washington have to have bilingual, not just ballots, but all the information in Spanish and English. And then King County is Chinese and Vietnamese and English. Well, voluntarily, the Secretary of State decided it's kind of a do-gooder thing. We will make Spanish ballots available in all the counties, even though it's not required. And you could download those ballots. You could download your ballot in English or in Spanish. I was intrigued. I don't actually speak Spanish very well, but I was curious. This was all done in $1 million sole source, no bid contract from the Secretary of State using federal HAVA money. And I saw the company, it's a Seattle company, and it looked all right to me. It was a minority-owned company, and they did this sort of stuff. So I downloaded my Spanish ballot and didn't have all the races on it. The only races on the Spanish language ballot were the ones that were the same everywhere in the state. So it had the president, it had the governor, it had the U.S. senators, all the statewide office holders, but it didn't even have the U.S. House of Representatives on there, and none of the local ones. And Secretary of State, it was a glitch. They use this term, glitch. Finally, after several election cycles, not being able to solve this within our county, I mean, our own county were issuing these ballots that were faulty in Spanish and did not have all the races on them. And they weren't even entirely in Spanish. They were mixed English and Spanish. They finally gotten rid of that altogether, which is better than none. And another thing that's really important, these weren't, you have to think like a criminal. In the federal law, it's bilingual. And what that means is, it's one ballot you've got the little squares down the middle, and on this side it's in Spanish, and on this side it's in English. So someone looking at the voter ballot doesn't know which language the voter used to fill it out. So you can't afterwards pick out all the Spanish ballots and chuck them or whatever. What they were doing here, these were just Spanish ballots. There were like a big mark on them for if someone was easy to identify. I mean, they'd be totally illegal, even if they were complete under the federal scheme. Well, these got this junked. They no longer issue the Spanish language ballots, which is, better than having false ballots. But how long this took here, and San Juan County said, if someone a Spanish person wanted to vote those other ballots, they could come in and they could talk to a government official who knows Spanish that will help them fill out the ballots, naming Marlene Henley, because she's currently bilingual. That's the solution here, is that someone that's having trouble with their English language ballot goes to an elected official for advice on how to help them. I mean, it's so naive that, anyway, yeah, so we did get rid of these faulty Spanish ballots.
What's to stop, I'm very naive about this, what's to stop somebody from printing up 17 ballots that you download?
Well, you can't, you have to return them to the signature. I mean, you can, there are ways.
Remember to sign that petition before you leave, folks.
One of the things that's actually better in our county, remember, I don't know if it is, I lived on this for 20 years. At the post office, the recycle was not locked. They have locks on them here now, right?
Yeah.
I think that's because the day after the ballots are sent out, half the people don't vote.
Yeah.
Where do all those ballots go? You go to the post office, you open it up, you aren't going to vote. Right on top of the, you could go in to, I lived at Orcas Landing, before post offices at Orcas. You could go in a couple days after those ballots arrive, and you can pull out all those ballots and people throw them away. I mean, they're valueless. You still have to be willing to forge the signature, get a signature forged. But just kind of how sloppy a lot of that is. There's another element that goes on here.
Tim.
Oh. Yeah.
I just have a question about, we continue it. Money-wise, if the statistics aren't honest about more voting absentee than voting in person, to me, going to a polling place, is that so expensive?
Is less expensive than
That's
vote by mail,
kind of-
which is really surprising to me.
In this time of budget austerity, it might be a good
Yeah, it actually
argument
is.
to advance.
I was actually surprised about that, but it's because they spent so much money for all of these contracts with these coders and all this stuff. And places like King County bought a building to handle their. I mean, it's actually the equipment and the processing. Actually, in the small counties, it might be cheaper to do vote by mail. But in the big counties, it's definitely more expensive, by quite a bit. And internet voting is also more expensive, and also reduces turnout. So,
Well, one more thing I wanted to say. When we won White Rosado and Green Party San Juan County against Sam Reed, Marlene Henley in San Juan County on this mail-in ballot tracker that linked the two barcodes so they can figure out how you vote, they dumped mail-in ballot tracker all across the state. Can't use it anymore. So what did they do instead? Marlene Henley signed a new contract with K&H in Everett, which now does the same thing. It's an uncertified assembly. And if you look at the website, it tells you they've got a camera on it as they're assembling the parts. It reads the barcodes on them, reads the barcode on your ballot, reads the barcode next to your name. And they've got a camera on it, and it reads the whole thing together and puts it together. But now you can't even watch them do it. And we thought by winning it, we'd get the barcode off the ballot. That's not what happened. They just went through another new, so we could do another 7.5-year lawsuit and stop them from doing K&H.
well, which is why I brought up the durability problem.
Yeah.
Because, I was watching in Wyoming, they were trying to, the Association of Municipalities is trying to roll back Freedom of Information law. And the Wyoming Press Association defeats it every year. But they have a paid lawyer, and the Association of Municipalities is big bucks coming in, and every year he just comes and does it again. And it's like, how much can we be outlasted? And that's really an issue that I haven't solved in my mind, but I've come to the conclusion that to create really meaningful lasting change, we're going to have to at least wrap our heads around the durability issue, because we have asymmetrical power with the lobbyists and the vendors and all this money coming in. And they just wait till we get tired of it and blow away. And that, unless we can figure out a way to kind of address that side of things, ultimately we will lose. And that's, I think, my bigger worry. I know that we're winning a lot of the battles right now when we take them on, but then they just come back when people have forgot about Tim White. So it's an issue, and it's not an insoluble issue, but it's something that we should at least be smart enough to realize that they're going to come back every year, and we have to maybe be thinking about that.
Why they want to be illegal, I don't know, because we have laws that say you can't put identifiers on ballots.
Isn't it really brazen?
There shall be no mark on the ballot card to distinguish an individual voter's ballot card from other ballot cards.
And they do it anyway.
On the last ballot that I got for the school thing, there was a little strip at the top that said, tear this off and keep it, or don't mail it in. Is that the identifier? And is that an acceptable solution? That they send it out, they scan it when they send it out, but then you remove that barcode before you return the ballot?
No.
This is a good question for Mylan Hanley. We didn't have that with mail-in ballot tracker because they did the hand scan beforehand between your name barcode and your ballot ID barcode. Why they include that on there is presumably because the system is set up for national use. And in a precinct, they used to have those tear-off serial numbers that would be on your ballot. And that's to control the ballots within the live voting in the precinct.
But the answer you're looking for is your name is still in the barcode on the ballot.
Before they sent it to me.
They
also
have
from the
associated, the unique barcode on your ballot for ours is the one on the lower left. That's the serial number barcode that is only on your ballot.
And they scan that along with my ballot envelope before
That is correct.
before it's mailed out.
That is correct.
And
Just
remember,
like
a
they did
barcode is
before.
not always a barcode like we think of. It's sometimes a data block, which is a little square, a little UVC
Yeah,
block.
those two
triangle,
E's.
yeah. And I would also like to thank you for your many years of incredible determination in keeping public attention on this issue. I think you've done it single-handedly well.
Thank you for that. And there are a lot of people involved in it. This lawsuit, didn't start out as a lawsuit. First what we did, we went to Mylan. Actually, first it was Cy Stevens, the auditor before.
Way back when?
Yeah, way back.
I mean, I'm like, Tim White is still at it, oh my God.
And I should,
You've been working on this issue as hard as anybody. I mean, hard.
It's just been on and on and on. But you know what? I think that's what it is going to take. When I started, maybe you too, everybody was like, well, we got an election coming up in 2004. We have to solve it before then.
Right.
And we have to get past that now and go as long as it takes, as long as it takes, as long as it takes. Yeah.
We got the county council to vote 5 to 6 back when we had 6. They voted 5 to 6. Gene Knapp, who was Randy's predecessor as prosecutor from Mr. Marcus, he voted to keep the barcodes on the ballot.
you
They
mean,
voted to take them off.
it was 5-1, right?
5 to 1 to take them off. And Randy Gaylord stood up and said, unconstitutional.
What?
Violation of the separation of powers.
What?
The county council does not have any power to tell the auditor how to conduct elections. I invalidate this vote.
Wow.
So then we'd also just gotten the right to initiative when we went to a charter county. So the very first initiative ever filed for San Juan County, we filed it in order to put it for a vote to get the ballots, barcodes off. So, and Randy Gaylord, after we got it approved, he said, even if this passes, same thing. The public does not have a right to tell the auditor what color pencils to buy. It's micromanagement. So going to the courts was a last resort, not a first resort. And actually, I don't really really recommend that in a way. It's really hard in the courts to have the final decision really be about the issue. It ends up being kind of sort of these technical things about that. So then there's a technical solution that, Mylene just issues a new contract, more expensive, but placed far away, and they do it, and I'm really doing the same thing.
It's time to go, kids.
Yep.
Yeah.
I want to say one real quick last thing though, and that is that there are actually government officials who believe that the public does not have the right to authenticate. On the website blackboxvoting.org, there's a tab called Transparency, and I did the legal research on that to show not only in the United States but in other countries the rationale behind why we absolutely have the right. But don't take it for granted that anyone will think that you do have the right to know whether the results are true or false. So, yeah, we've got a little bit of work still to do.
Thank you.